everyone, my name is Rachel Kornack. I'm one of the instructors for Environmental Applications at GIS. We are an online class at Penn State's online geospatial program. I'm calling in from Los Angeles.
Bishop, your other online geography 40s as an instructor calling in from Happy Valley, Pennsylvania.
And so the purpose of this video is we want to show you a few different examples of how you can take a few additional steps and really make a big difference in what you provide as a deliverable to your client, boss, and team. So, Joe, you want to talk about the importance of this.
These kinds of exercises, and what we hope you take away from this is really to kind of identify those extra steps that are going to take a product from, what would be an average to kind of good for product to something that's really going to get the attention of the audience that you're trying to impress.
Right, so that you get hired, you get the contract, you get the grant that you wanted, so basically that you're successful. So let's jump in and look at a few examples. This first example is a pie chart that we often see from students where they follow the directions technically, except there is not a legend. So it's really difficult for anyone other than the instructor or someone who followed the directions of this lesson to understand what this graph means. It's essentially meaningless. Joe, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that this is a great place to start because what often happens is students don't kind of step back from an assignment and put themselves into the eyes of a viewer that's looking at this for the very first time.
And I don't think it's just students. I think that's most people in GIS. I think it's hard to have that perspective, and what really separates the really successful people from those that are marginally successful are the ones that really do step back and think about who is going to use this and realize that they're not like me. They're not a technology expert, and they probably have no idea how I created any of this.
That's extremely true, and I see it every day.
Absolutely. Okay, on to this next example here. So here's a pretty good example where in this option they've changed the title to be a little bit more meaningful, and there's also labels here. I think the issue here is that the labels are so detailed that they're hard to grasp the meaning quickly. Did you have anything to add?
Well, what I think happens often, and we see this in a lot of different maps, a lot of different products that people put out. The information in the table comes in a raw form, and it's usually in a unit. The phone is a unit that just sort of comes along with the data, and there hasn't been any work done on massaging it so the units kind of make sense.
Speaking of units, this doesn't even say what these are, so it's hard to know what 25,824.543 what. So this is a great example where you've labeled something, but it doesn't quite make sense yet. So let's look at another example that actually is pretty good. This one now has a legend here. I guess this actually has similar problems. A new problem popped up here, and that is there's no label here. So this is related to using the default from the program, right? The default just puts in whatever's in your attribute table. So this particular value here is no data in your attribute table. And if you don't update that text to say something meaningful, it's just going to show up as blank. And that's not very helpful for your audience.
It makes them walk away with a question as to, okay, what does all this mean? And again, from that client kind of aspect, does this person know what we're looking for?
Good point. Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what clients and grant agencies, people that are trying to hire you, are thinking is, does this agency or person understand my needs, and can they meet them, or are they just simply, connecting the dots and doing the bare minimum? Now, here's another example. This is a bar chart from this lesson. This one is reasonably good. But you have the same problem here where they didn't change the text here in the attribute table, so this comes up as blank. Also here, one of my favorite pet peeves is not changing, not customizing the names. So you get these cryptic default names that the computer requires, which are essentially meaningless to most people, right?
That's really what it boils it down to is you always need to be aware of what the defaults are saying, because there's a lot of common things that are used in those defaults that mean everything to the GIS practitioner and mean absolutely nothing to anybody else.
Absolutely. So another thing here is just a really kind of unnecessary amount of labels here that aren't really adding to the figure, just taking up space. Now this is a really good example of how you can take a few extra steps and it makes a big difference. In this example you see that the person actually updated the attribute table to say no data, so now that label was brought into the figure and this value is clear. Also here, you only have enough labels to really give you the information you need. There's not excessive information here. You can just glance at this and get an idea of the meaning without spending a lot of time focusing on the little details. And also the units here are listed, so someone can make sense of this information. Do you have anything to add about this, Joe?
Yeah, I think that this example does round things out, and perhaps the only change that I might suggest is that no data thing is somewhere in this kind of what they mean by no data might be made more clear.
That's a good point. Like, what's the difference between other and no data? Another interesting thing here is this title. This is a great example of adding information, but not necessarily giving any context. So it's not clear what you're supposed to do with this graph. Where if this title said something along the lines of emergent vegetation dominates in 1962, for example, it would be a lot easier to understand. So another graph that we wanted to show you is this is from a Try This activity where somebody took the let me zoom in so we can see this. Someone took the invasive species data and the emergent vegetation data and compared it to the Lake Erie water levels. So you can see the trend in how, oops, I didn't mean that to zoom out. You can see how as the water level increases over time, the amount of emergent vegetation and invasive species fluctuates and is dependent on that. So this is a really good example of how you can go above and beyond and show more.
This really was a neat kind of try this example. And one of the students, if I remember correctly, went out online and did just a little bit of extra work, above what the assignment asked for, and found water level information and was able to combine it into this chart, which might be a really neat product.
Right, and they had to go into Excel help or just know how to do this independently, where you're creating a graph with two vertical axes, which is, it's not easy to do that, and you have to click around before you can finally get it right. So it's an example of how going just a little bit above and beyond what's expected really makes you stand out. Okay, let's go on to some of the maps. So here's a few examples of the map layouts that we've seen in the past. Now the purpose really of designing this map layout was to give your reader in a easy to digest format a lot of information that's complicated. So the idea here was you're going to design a layout where somebody could look at this map and see that over time the invasive species and types of vegetation were changing, and that is also related to changes in water level. So we'll just look at a few examples and see how effective each individual was at conveying that particular story. So let's start with this one. The first thing I notice about this, and I apologize for the image quality, is not the greatest on this, but I think you can get the main point, and that is the first data set isn't symbolized properly, so you can't actually even see the invasive species. This is an error that I see all the time. Actually, we can zoom in here on this legend. You can see it better. Here's a classic example of using defaults, default names. So this Ottawa NWR and study underscore site, the word legend here, it's all very unprofessional looking. This would, if I saw this on a map, I would not hire this person for a job. Would you, Joe?
No, it's that attention to detail thing that jumps right out at you here. Everything went to the defaults between the legend, the scale bar that you can see as well. It's not doing it for me.
Right. Okay, now here's another example. We see this often where the concept of a locator map is not really understood. So you put a locator map on there, but it doesn't actually help anybody locate your study area. So this locator map, I know it's very blurry, but is completely useless because it doesn't show anything other than the study area. This could be in Zimbabwe and nobody would know. On to the next one. So this one has a few other interesting aspects. So here we have a title, at least. The last one didn't even have a title. So this title I think is pretty good. It is telling the map reader what they're supposed to be looking for in this map, right? So they're looking for changes in vegetation due to fluctuating water levels. This one is interesting because it's not zoomed to the study area, so you can't see the detail that we really wanted you to convey in this map. The labels are pretty good. They can be improved. There's a lot of duplication here where the year is repeated, for example. But this legend, I think, is a lot easier to understand than the first one. We also have the water levels labeled, and the scale bar has been customized into units that people think in. So there's not lots and lots of decimal points at the end, which kudos to them for remembering to do that. Joe, did you want to say anything about this study map?
I think you covered everything I was going to mention, but your inset map here, your locator map is kind of like the last one, in that it's zoomed in too far as far as what you know, and then they put a title in, but if you look at the title, it doesn't tell you where the study site is.
Right.
But Lake Erie, Ohio is kind of not really out of place.
Classic example of assuming that your reader knows about your project and would automatically understand where this strange box is in context to any other known point. So this is an interesting example, two of these actually, where somebody really kind of put a lot of thought and creativity into creating their map, and they ended up a little bit too colorful, or I think they're borderline unprofessional looking because the color isn't, it's not really adding to the story, it's distracting from the story and, just taking up space.
I've lost track of how many examples that I've seen where a person was really trying to show that they knew all the parts of the software and what it could do, and they kind of just went overboard.
Oh, that's interesting. Right, that's a good point. Everything in moderation. Here's another, locator map that doesn't make sense. It literally says locator map, which I like this, except you can't locate anything. Great. And another scale bar that's really kind of hard to make sense of. They actually did a really good job here of changing the layer name so they make sense. So now this says Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge instead of NWR.
There was some completeness too. You saw at the bottom where they made sure to include the sources of their data.
Right.
All these details are important. So, from that respect, the student here did a nice job of making things to include everything that was needed.
Right. And I guess we see this all the time where each map has some really good aspects and some that really could use some improvement, which is, why we're showing so many different examples. Another thing to mention about this particular map is that they left out the base map in the background, so it's just blank. You can't actually tell that this is a water body, that this is the interface of water and land here. That's not clear, because they've removed the base map. Same thing with this example here. One thing I do like about this particular map is that there's a caption here, explaining, kind of what this is. Let's see. So on to a few other examples. So in this particular one, I really like this because it's just so clean. It's really easy to look at and it's easy to read. They've zoomed in, excuse me, to a really nice kind of extent where you can see the detail that you want. They went the extra mile and added a shading behind their text boxes so you can read them. They're not obscured, like for example in this one where it's difficult to read because of what's behind the text. Let's see, what else is nice about this one? This legend, I think, just looks really clean to me. It's easy to understand. And now we've got a study map here, a locator map. That, this is getting better. At least now we have Toledo, and you can see that this is in relation to Toledo. But some people might not know where Toledo is. There's a lot of different Toledos. This could be Toledo anywhere, even in another country, for example.
Yeah, I think that there's an easy assumption. I've lost track of how many times I've seen it in presentations and mapping things like this where people forget that the audience potentially could be from another country as well. So not only are you trying to convince perhaps people in Ohio on a project like this, but you might be sharing it with people across the country or on the other side of the world.
Absolutely, and to assume that people on your team were born, in this country is a little outdated. I mean, most of the teams that I've worked on, there have been several people that were born in other countries, and so they just don't get some of the context that you think you don't need to state, but really you do to be, as we said earlier, be nice to your audience, and they will appreciate you.
Well, one thing that's nice to see, and you're seeing it here, and you saw it in the Elastics example, where they really did, the student really did take some time with the title, and try to, add more information, to try utilizing that space to better inform their audience as to what they were going to be viewing in their maps here.
Yeah, I think this is a great title. It's the first one I've seen where it talks about vegetation response to fluctuating water levels and the spread of invasive species what's the word I want? As a result of that. So we're really moving in the right direction of telling the story that we wanted with our data here. And this map, I also like how they label the water levels right here, and they also show in relation to each other how high they were. So this is the lowest water level, this is highest, and that's in between. So the reader doesn't have to, look at those numbers, come to that conclusion in their head. You're really asking the person to do a lot of mental leaps without giving them this kind of context. So I really appreciate that part. And this is nice. I think they showed that they could use some of the more advanced options within ArcMap, and it made it look professional and nice, not overdone. Now, this particular map is one of my favorites. I thought they did a really good job of making it clear that this is about changes over time. Without having to state that, I got that point just by looking at it. It was really clear because they were so front and center, these numbers here. And it was clear to me the way that they overlapped them, that these were two different data sets from the same year. This is the only example I really saw where, that part of the story was really clear.
Well, it's about kind of taking advantage of the labeling you use in a map to help you tell the story without going overboard. Without, in this case, if you're relying solely on these maps to tell the story, and often that's the case. That you can't hand them an extra pile of text. That this is it, and they did a nice job of taking advantage of what they had at their disposal without distracting or confusing their audience.
Right, absolutely. Now this locator map here, actually, I think this is really getting towards what we want to see. You can tell Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Michigan. It's along the border of a lake. It's giving you some context of where this really is. This is one of the better, I think, locator maps. Now this scale bar has strange units again. who knows how far 0.4 miles is, and not a lot of people. They can't just, quickly determine a distance from that. One I think downside of this map is the strange colors that sort of clash. Now, I don't think that really needed to be in like a light green color. Maybe that's just being picky, but it caught my attention. Here's another example where we see a lot of some of the good that we've talked about, and some of the bad. So this title is pretty informative. It's the effects of the water level fluctuation on vegetation and invasive species. You've got the acronym here that maybe people don't know what that is. A few obvious, I guess, pieces of evidence that this person, when they made this map, they assumed that the person who was reading it also did this assignment. Like, they would know invasive, instead of saying invasive species, it's kind of like the layer name, the technical layer name, and not the meaning of what this is trying to show. Here's a great locator map. Tells you the study site location. Actually labels the study site. You can tell that this is Ohio, mostly. It's a little bit hard to read, but it's getting there. Hopefully you guys can see the range of how helpful these locator maps are. In this last example, it's getting close, but you can't read any of the labels, so it's still really difficult to tell where this might be unless you happen to be from Michigan and Ohio. I don't think anybody would recognize that coastline and know that that's Michigan.
Yeah, it's regional context that often you see people trying and almost relying on it or forgetting about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that level of detail that's going to help you tell your story. And it does seem like maybe, at least a part of the problem here perhaps, is just how this project was saved, and the scale in which it was saved made it so it was a little too fuzzy.
Right.
Maybe it's an extra challenge for someone trying to interpret the information.
Now, this is interesting. In their title, they actually say degraded wetland complex. So you're hinting that this is about something going wrong here that I didn't see in any of the other maps. The point of this is to show a negative effect in the environment, and they're the only person so far that really pointed that out. And I also like how they grouped these maps together in a box, so you can tell they go together. It's another way to group the elements visually. So I guess that's the last of our examples, and we hope that you were able to challenge yourself and your own ideas so that your next map design will be better than your first.
Always remember that you're really speaking to your audience, and you need to know who your audience is.
Absolutely. So we look forward to seeing your next set of maps.